The first sign of trouble wasn't loud. It wasn't an alarm or a siren. It was the silence. A quiet, creeping silence that fell across the 42nd floor of Delta Tech Systems, one of the top tech firms in Atlanta. At first, people thought it was just a blip. Someone tapped their keyboard. Another clicked their mouse. Nothing responded. Then, one by one, screens across the floor went dark. "Wait, what just happened?" someone said. "Did we lose power?" "No, the lights are still on." It was 8:13 a.m., prime hour at Delta Tech. Developers were already deep in their code, analysts were preparing charts for the 9:00 a.m. investor briefing, and senior executives were checking performance metrics for the company's biggest product launch of the year. A revolutionary AI assistant, Delta One, was scheduled to roll out across 3 continents within the hour. And then, everything froze. Emails vanished, terminals shut down, monitors blinked, then filled with static. Even the touchscreen coffee machines went dead. The digital heartbeat of the building flatlined. Inside the glass-encased executive office, Richard Dunlap, Delta Tech's CEO, slammed his espresso cup down so hard it cracked the saucer. A short, stocky man with silver hair and the permanent scowl of someone used to being obeyed, Dunlap had been in the industry long enough to recognize one thing immediately. "This isn't a glitch, it's a full system crash," he growled. He stormed out into the open concept floor, his voice booming like thunder. "Where's it? I want everyone on deck, now!" Employees scrambled. Phones rang, but nothing connected. Slack was down. Email was down. Even the building's internal server communication tools were down. Not just the software. The infrastructure had failed. Down in the lobby, Clara Johnson had just finished wiping down the revolving glass doors. She worked the night shift as a contract cleaner. For the last 7 years, she'd quietly arrived after sunset and left at sunrise, polishing glass, mopping marble floors, cleaning up crumbs from the desks of people who never noticed her. She didn't mind. Not really. The pay was steady, and she had a rhythm. Start on the 40th floor, work her way down. It was quiet work, invisible work. Just the way she liked it. Her 17-year-old son, Miles, sat in the far corner of the lobby near the vending machine, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes on his beat-up Chromebook. He waited there every morning while Clara finished up her shift before heading to school. Delta Tech didn't mind. They barely noticed him. Miles wasn't doing homework. Not in the traditional sense, anyway. His screen glowed with terminal windows, code compilers, and a network traffic visualizer. He wasn't watching YouTube or scrolling TikTok. He was deep in documentation on container orchestration and cluster diagnostics. The kind of stuff Delta Tech engineers should have been reading. A soft chime rang out from the lobby's elevator, then stopped mid-tone. The LED panel above the security desk blinked, then shut off. Miles looked up. Something wasn't right. He shifted his attention to the glass doors behind the front security station, the ones that offered a view into Delta Tech's main server room. Just beyond that glass, he noticed something strange. The tiny green lights on the server racks were blinking irregularly. They weren't supposed to do that. He looked at the access logs on the security screen nearby. They, too, had stopped updating. No logins, no warnings, just one frozen message. Air Connect failed. Upstairs, things were unraveling quickly. In the boardroom, 6 members of Delta Tech's senior staff had gathered around a giant touchscreen conference table, completely useless now that it wouldn't turn on. The head of engineering mumbled about rolling back changes. The CTO was sweating through his undershirt. The head of cybersecurity, a man who spent more time writing reports than analyzing logs, muttered the one-word guaranteed to spark panic. Maybe it's a ransomware attack. Dunlap turned pale. On launch day? No one spoke. In the hallway just outside the boardroom, Clara moved silently, pushing her mop cart toward the elevator. She wasn't supposed to be on this floor, but a spilled coffee from last night had left a sticky patch near the exec suite. As she passed the room, she heard Dunlap's voice echo. "If this system doesn't come back online in the next hour, our stock will drop 18%. 18%. That's $300 million in shareholder value. You fix this, or you're all gone." She paused. Not because she cared about stock numbers, but because of the tone, the pure, unchecked panic in a man who usually barked commands like a general. From the elevator, she glanced back toward the glass wall of the server room. And that's when she saw Miles standing there.
He wasn't near any employees. He wasn't being disruptive. He was just staring at the blinking lights like he understood what they meant. She walked up to him quietly. "Everything okay, baby?" Miles didn't look away. "Ma, I think their whole system's looping itself to death." "What do you mean?" "I mean their failover clusters misfiring and crashing their routing protocols." She blinked. "Say that again in English." Miles finally turned to look at her. "They built a system that doesn't know how to fix itself when it panics. And now, it's panicking." From somewhere upstairs, a voice screamed, "We need answers now." Miles zipped up his backpack slowly, his expression unreadable. "They're not going to find it in time." Clara blinked. "What do you mean?" He met her eyes, calm, steady. "Sure. I mean, if someone doesn't step in, they're going to lose everything." The corporate tower that rose above downtown Atlanta glistened in the morning light, but inside it was pure chaos. Upstairs, executives shouted into dead phones, IT personnel scrambled from terminal to terminal, and developers stared helplessly at frozen code environments. The artificial intelligence engine they'd poured millions into, Delta One, had flatlined just moments before its public launch. Down in the lobby, however, everything was still. Too still. Miles Johnson remained by the glass wall that looked into the heart of the company's server room. To most, he was just another kid in a hoodie, standing too close to restricted areas, an extra shadow in the corner, the kind of person people didn't see, unless they thought he didn't belong. But Miles wasn't just watching blinking lights. He was reading them. He had spent the last 4 years teaching himself how to understand systems, networking protocols, memory leaks, container failures, zero-day vulnerabilities. He'd memorized Linux commands like lyrics, watched MIT lectures between bus rides, even built his own data center simulation on an old laptop in his mom's laundry room. And now at 17, he could see what none of the engineers upstairs had figured out. Delta Tech's system hadn't been hacked. It had collapsed under its own weight. On a bench nearby, Clara Johnson sipped slowly from a paper cup of vending machine coffee. Her cleaning shift had ended 15 minutes ago, but she always waited with Miles until the first wave of executives pushed through the lobby so they could walk out quietly, unnoticed. She glanced over at her son. There was something different about the way he was looking through that glass. Not just curiosity, not boredom. Focus. "Miles," she said gently. "You good?" He nodded, then said without looking back, "Their backup containers failed to sync with the load balancer. That's why the system crashed." Clara blinked at him. "Uh-huh. And what does that mean in Mama English?" Miles turned, lowering his voice. "They put all their eggs in one basket. That basket got too full, overflowed, and now it's leaking everywhere." Clara nodded, a slow smile teasing the corner of her lips. "Well, you always were good with eggs." She didn't entirely understand what he was saying, but she didn't need to. Miles had always been different. In school, Miles rarely talked. Teachers marked him as quiet or distant. Some assumed he was just another struggling black kid from the South Side. Few ever realized that he had written his own operating system for fun, or that he could reverse engineer entire apps just by looking at their front-end behavior. While his classmates played Call of Duty, he studied code execution pathways. While they worried about prom, he was building neural networks. And when he waited in lobbies like this, while his mom polished the same corporate world that never acknowledged her, he soaked up everything, every overheard conversation, Every line of exposed code on some forgotten monitor. Every mistake, every success, every cover-up. He was a silent observer in the temple of power. And now, he was about to step into it. Suddenly, a group of interns sprinted across the marble floor. One of them, a young woman with glasses and a stressed expression, dropped her tablet and cursed under her breath. Miles moved to help her, picking it up and handing it over. "Thanks," she said breathlessly. Miles glanced at the screen. A console log was frozen mid-refresh. "That's your deployment manager?" She blinked. "Yeah, how do you know that?" "It's looping itself to death." She stared. "Who are you?" He smiled slightly. "No one important." He turned to go back to his seat, but she followed. "Wait, what do you mean it's looping?" "Your orchestrator failed to health check the pod state, so it just keeps trying to restart the container, but it never verifies whether it actually terminated." "Holy crap," she looked up the stairwell. "You need to come upstairs." Miles hesitated. "I don't work here." "Neither do the guys breaking your system," he replied with a shrug. She laughed nervously, not sure if he was joking. "What's your name?" "Miles." "Miles what?" "Miles Johnson." She paused. "Wait, like Clara Johnson? She's the cleaner here, right?" He nodded slowly. "She's also my mom." Inside the executive boardroom, Richard Dunlap was halfway through yelling at the lead systems architect when the door opened unexpectedly. In walked the intern, and behind her, the cleaning lady's kid. Dunlap's eyes narrowed. "Why is there a child in my war room?" The room went silent. The intern, breathing hard, said, "Because he just diagnosed the problem." Heads turned, laughter sputtered. The lead engineer raised an eyebrow. "Kid, this is a multi-node Kubernetes mesh spread across 3 continents. You think you can fix that with a Google search?" Miles calmly stepped forward. "You're not listening. Your orchestrator is stuck because your internal monitoring tool is running under a broken token. The cluster thinks it's healthy, but your API gateway can't handshake with the edge nodes." Everyone stared. The lead systems architect paled. "That's not possible. We would have seen it in the metrics. Unless the metrics were cached." No one spoke. Dunlap leaned in. "All right, genius, what's the fix?" Miles shrugged. "Let me see the admin terminal." Clara stood frozen in the hallway, mop bucket beside her, watching her son speak confidently in a room filled with suits who made more in a week than she did in a year. He wasn't scared. He wasn't cocky. He just belonged. Back in the boardroom, Dunlap looked around at his top engineers. None of them spoke. He sighed, rubbed his face, and motioned to the terminal. "You've got 90 seconds. Miles nodded. "That's all I'll need." The elevator dinged softly as Miles and the intern, Jamie Patel, stepped into the executive floor. But the moment they crossed the threshold, they entered another world. A world of tension, fear, and desperation, wrapped in glass walls and expensive suits. The floor was sleek, polished, every detail curated for power and control. Framed awards lined the hallway. Monitors on the wall displayed stock prices in red, blinking down, down, down. The hum of panic vibrated in the air. Inside the main boardroom, 6 executives were mid-argument, voices raised and cutting over each other like knives in a blender. "We can't get into the internal failover system. DevOps says they're locked out. The cluster has 2,000 active nodes. If we start cold rebooting without a map, we'll lose everything. Try the emergency restore. Revert to yesterday's build. That'll take hours. What part of launch day are you not understanding?" In the middle of it all, Richard Dunlap, the CEO, stood with both palms on the conference table, breathing through clenched teeth. The veins in his neck pulsed like warning lights. "This can't be happening," he muttered. His eyes were bloodshot, collar unbuttoned, and $600 shoes tapping anxiously beneath the table. And then, without warning, the door opened. All heads turned. There, standing beside Jamie, was Miles Johnson. He looked small in comparison to the executives. His hoodie slightly wrinkled, His sneakers scuffed. He carried no briefcase, no badge, no laptop, just confidence. Dunlap's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell is this?" Jamie cleared her throat. "Sir, this is Miles. He's Clara Johnson's son from the night shift." A pause. You could feel the heat rising in the room. "So why," Dunlap said slowly, "is the janitor's son standing in my boardroom during a company-wide crisis?" "Because," Jamie said, "he might know exactly what's causing the crash." The silence was immediate. Then, laughter. Not from Jamie, not from Miles, but from the lead systems architect, a man in his 40s with a trimmed beard and a sarcastic smirk. "You mean this kid figured out what 10 senior engineers couldn't? Come on." Another executive chuckled nervously. "Maybe he should apply for our internship program." Dunlap, however, didn't laugh. His eyes were locked on Miles, watching him closely. Miles spoke softly, but firmly. "You're running a Kubernetes mesh across 3 continents, right?" The sarcasm drained from the room. How did he know that? Miles stepped toward the display screen on the wall, which was still frozen. "The problem isn't your code, it's your monitoring stack. Your health check endpoint is misconfigured, and it's feeding bad signals to the orchestrator. Your system thinks everything is fine because it's reading cache data, so it's not killing the broken pods. It's letting them loop." Dead silence. The systems architect's smirk vanished. Miles turned to the room. "Right now, your East Coast nodes are feeding heartbeat signals from yesterday's build. Your load balancer is rerouting traffic to dead containers, which then fail to authenticate with your backend API. That's why your dashboards froze." Jamie looked around. Everyone was stunned. Dunlap rubbed his temple. "Why haven't we caught this?" "Because your observability layer isn't using live snapshots," Miles replied. "It's running on a 24-hour passive interval to reduce server load." Now even the CTO looked uncomfortable. The kid wasn't wrong. "Okay," Dunlap finally said. "Let's say you're right. What's the fix?" Miles glanced at the frozen terminal in the corner of the room, then looked at the lead architect. "Do you have root access to the admin node?" The man blinked. "Of course I do." "Then open a terminal." Dunlap hesitated for a moment, then waved at the screen. "Give him a shot." Clara Johnson was still standing in the hallway. She had made her way up slowly, unsure why Jamie and Miles had taken the elevator, unsure what was happening. But something in her gut told her to follow. Now she stood silently outside the boardroom, mop in hand, watching her son stand calmly in a room full of millionaires, diagnosing their system like he built it himself. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from pride. They'd never seen him. They never saw her. But they were seeing him now. Inside, Miles leaned over the terminal. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. $SHAdmin at cluster-gmt.prod. He typed quickly, gracefully, no hesitation, no wasted movements. $kubek git pods. A vertical bar grep crash loop. A list filled the screen. "There," he pointed. "Those are the culprits. $kubectl delete pod. Force. Grace period =0. Pod underscore name. $kubectl rollout. Restart deployment. Delta encore." The commands fired like bullets. Everyone stared. A moment passed, then another. And then the main dashboard flickered. Not an error this time. Not a warning, just one simple message. System restored. A long, stunned silence. A long, stunned silence, and then chaos. The head of marketing screamed, running into the hallway. The CTO slumped into his chair, wiping sweat from his forehead. The systems architect stared, jaw open. Dunlap just stood there blinking, as if trying to process what had just happened. Miles stepped back from the terminal. Calm, steady. He turned to Dunlap. Your system was fine. Your monitoring wasn't. Jamie let out a long breath and grinned. The room was still spinning when the CTO finally muttered, "That was the cleanest fix we've had all year." Dunlap didn't speak at first. He just looked at Miles. Not like a CEO looking at a cleaner's son, but like a general staring at the soldier who just saved the war. For the first time all morning, the 42nd floor of Delta Tech Systems was quiet. Not the kind of silence that follows panic, but the kind that follows awe. The kind that settles in when people realize they just witnessed something rare, something extraordinary. In the corner, the massive digital dashboard pulsed back to life. Monitors across the floor lit up with restored connectivity. Emails began flooding in. Code repositories synced. Every heartbeat of the system, once frozen, was now breathing again. And all of it, every bit of it, because of a 17-year-old kid in a hoodie. Miles stepped away from the terminal. He didn't ask for applause, didn't wait for thanks. He just quietly zipped up his bag like it was any other morning. But everyone was watching now. Richard Dunlap, CEO and master of his universe, stood completely still. His signature arrogance, always just beneath the surface, seemed to have evaporated. He looked at Miles, really looked at him. For once, the young man wasn't invisible. You brought it all back," Dunlap finally said. Miles simply nodded. "I did what needed to be done." The CTO exhaled like he'd just escaped a burning building. "Kid, do you even realize what you just did? That system, our system, was about to cost us hundreds of millions. You saved this company." "No," Miles replied. "I saved your launch." Everyone blinked. The distinction wasn't lost on them. "The system still needs fixing," he added. "What I did was a patch, like putting a tourniquet on a bullet wound." He turned to Jamie. "Your observability stack is dangerous. You're flying blind. You'll crash again if you don't rebuild the core logic of your health checks." The room was quiet again. Jamie smiled. She was the only one who didn't look shocked anymore, because she'd already seen it. "You should have seen the way he read that system from the lobby," she said, shaking her head. "Like he designed it himself." Miles stepped back, away from the boardroom table. "My mom's probably waiting. I should go." He turned and walked toward the door. That was the moment Dunlap finally snapped out of it. "Wait," Miles paused. "You're not going anywhere." The energy shifted. Executives exchanged looks. Some leaned forward. Others watched Dunlap cautiously. He stepped closer, adjusting the cuffs of his dress shirt, attempting to regain his usual dominance. "I don't know who you are, or where you learned that, but I want to offer you something." Miles raised an eyebrow. Dunlap gestured towards the long glass windows that overlooked downtown Atlanta. "This company runs on people who see what others don't, people who can solve impossible problems. You did that. You are that." "What's your point?" Miles asked coolly. Dunlap smiled shark-like. "We have internship programs, elite-level ones, but I'm ready to skip the line. I'll put you directly on the DevOps core team, paid 6 figures." A collective gasp. The CTO's head swiveled like a bobblehead. "Sir, he's 17. "So what?" Dunlap snapped. "He's better than half the people in this room." Miles hesitated. Part of him wanted to say yes. The offer was bigger than anything he'd imagined. More money than his mother had ever made in a year. More opportunity than most kids from his side of town ever even dreamed of. But something held him back. He looked out the glass wall and saw his mother, standing by the elevator with her mop. And then he remembered. 4 years ago, Miles had been 12, tagging along on one of Clara's late-night shifts. He'd watched from behind a corner while a mid-level executive yelled at her over a smudge on a window. She'd apologized. She hadn't made excuses. But that night, she'd gone home with aching arms and a red ring on her finger from the chemicals, and never once had anyone looked her in the eye. Now they were practically on their knees for her son. Miles looked back at Dunlap. You're only offering me that job now because I fixed something you didn't understand. Dunlap frowned. That's how value works, son. Miles shook his head. No, that's how power works. Another silence. He continued. If I'd sent in a resume 2 weeks ago, you would have laughed. If I walked in for an interview wearing this hoodie, you wouldn't have let me finish my first sentence. That's not true. It's very true. He turned to the others in the room. You didn't see me until you needed me. No one argued, because deep down, they knew he was right. Miles walked toward the door again. Thanks for the offer, but I'm not here for scraps from a table I was never invited to. The door opened. He stepped out. In the hallway, Clara Johnson wiped her eyes before he saw the tears. You okay, Ma? She nodded, then pulled him into a hug so tight it nearly cracked a rib. You made them listen, she whispered. I've been working here for 7 years. Never heard one of them say thank you. You show up for 10 minutes and the whole damn building stops. Miles smiled into her shoulder. They didn't stop, Ma. They paused. Same thing, she said. Back in the boardroom, Dunlap stood frozen. Then, slowly, he sank into his chair. Find out who that kid is, he murmured to the CTO. Everything. Where he goes to school, what he studies. I want him in this company, even if I have to rebuild the internship program from scratch. The CTO looked at him. Sir, what if he doesn't want to work for us? Dunlap looked at the screen, where Delta One was rebooting in real time, perfectly on schedule. Then we'll watch him change the industry without us. The elevator doors slid closed behind Miles and Clara. Neither of them said a word at first. Clara clutched her cleaning cart handle like it anchored her to reality, while Miles stared straight ahead, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Only once they were halfway to the ground floor did she speak, her voice barely above whisper. You turned that whole room upside down. Miles didn't look at her. Felt more like I turned on a light. They just didn't like what they saw. Clara gave a quiet laugh, the kind that held decades of swallowed pride. Baby, you were seen today. That's something? But Miles wasn't so sure. He'd been seen, yes, but for what? For being a tech prodigy? For saving the launch? Not for the years he spent learning alone. Not for the nights he stayed up debugging his own thoughts in silence. Not for being the kid sitting on a bench outside the server room, invisible until the lights started flashing red. They saw his utility, not his worth. That difference mattered. Back in the Delta Tech Tower, the boardroom that had been full of panic was now full of noise. Executives talked over each other, trying to recast the narrative, rewriting the morning's disaster into a triumph of resilience. Dunlap paced near the windows, his eyes narrowed. We spin this right, it becomes a story of innovation, he said. A system failure turned redemption. We don't say it crashed, we say it evolved. The CTO raised an eyebrow. And the kid? We don't bury him, Dunlap said. We spotlight him. The story needs a hero. He snapped his fingers. Let's call it Delta One Reinvented. Another executive leaned forward. You think he'll agree to be part of the campaign? Doesn't matter, Dunlap said. He'll want in eventually. They always do. But what Dunlap didn't realize was, Miles was already gone. Outside, the city buzzed under a blanket of soft sunlight. Honking cars, humming trains, the rush of 1,000 people trying to get somewhere fast. Clara and Miles walked side by side down the street. No fanfare, no headlines. Just a mother and her son, one pushing a cart full of used rags, the other carrying a secondhand laptop in a backpack patched with duct tape. You know they'll call you again, Clara said, glancing sideways. Let them. And what'll you say? I don't need their office. I'll build my own. She smiled, not because she doubted him, but because he sounded just like her brother. Miles's uncle, who once dreamed of being a doctor, until a stop and frisk ended his scholarship hopes. That dream never left the sidewalk where it died. But this was different. Miles wasn't asking permission. That night, in their modest apartment on the south side, the lights flickered as usual when the microwave ran. But Miles didn't notice. He was already deep into code, multiple screens open, frameworks compiling, notes scrawled across a cracked whiteboard with dry erase markers from the dollar store. He wasn't rebuilding Delta Tech's system. He was building something else, something better, something no one could lock him out of. Clara peeked her head in. You didn't even eat your dinner. Not hungry. She nodded, then looked at the whiteboard. What's all this? It's called MirrorNet, Miles replied. That's some kind of superhero thing? Not really. It's a code base that lets users detect faults in any AI system they use. Real time. Like a second brain watching the first one. She blinked. Why would people need that? Because companies don't tell the truth about what their systems do. He pulled up a dashboard. Imagine if someone like you could open an app and see when their data is being misused, when a facial recognition tool flagged them unfairly, when a background check AI used biased filters. He turned to her. People talk about transparency. I want to make it automatic. She nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but recognizing the fire in his voice. Sounds like you're building something dangerous. Only to people who lie for a living. Meanwhile, Jamie Patel sat at her dorm desk, staring at a blinking cursor. She was drafting an email. Subject, you're not invisible anymore. She typed, Miles, you probably don't want to hear from anyone at Delta Tech, but I wanted you to know what happened after you left. First off, you're all they can talk about. Second, they're trying to shape the story like you were a lucky break. Like your brilliance just happened to appear when they needed it. But I know better. I saw you watching from the lobby, saw you studying that system like it belonged to you. I don't know what you plan to do next, but whatever it is, I believe in it. And if you ever need someone who understands how hard it is to be overlooked, I'm here. Jamie. She hit send. And then she smiled, because she knew something else too. Miles wasn't a story they could own. He was a storm coming. Across the city, in a different tower, a tech blog writer named Keisha Barnes scrolled through a leaked Slack screenshot. It read, Cleaning lady's kid just saved Delta Tech. CEO is fuming. Kid walked out like a ghost. She paused, sipped her tea, and started typing. The next morning, Miles opened his inbox and saw something strange. Not one, not 10, but hundreds of messages. Investors, news reporters, students, coders from Brazil to Boston, civil rights groups, tech transparency advocates. Every one of them saying the same thing. We saw what you did. We need more of it. What are you building next? Miles closed the laptop slowly, then almost to himself whispered, Not building it for them. He looked over at Clara, still asleep on the couch. I'm building it for us. The sun rose differently that morning, not in the sky. It still climbed the same arc across Atlanta's skyline, but in people, in conversations, in boardrooms, dorm rooms, break rooms. Because a kid with no degree, no title, and no permission had just changed the game, and people were starting to notice. Not just who Miles was, but what he represented. He wasn't just the janitor's son anymore. He was a symbol of every person who had ever been overlooked, passed over, underestimated, and still rose. Across the country, in a high school classroom in Oakland, a teacher rolled in a cart and connected her laptop to the projector. On the screen, the class saw a headline. Teen turns tables on tech elites with raw talent. Then a photo of Miles in his hoodie, standing beside the Delta Tech servers. The classroom buzzed. Yo, he looks like us, one student muttered. He ain't even a college grad? Nope, the teacher replied, self-taught, and he saved $1 billion system. They all went quiet. Then one girl whispered, So, what's our excuse? The teacher smiled. There isn't one. You're not behind, you're just hidden. But trust me, the right light will find you. At Delta Tech headquarters, that light was blinding now. Dunlap sat at the head of the boardroom table, jaw clenched. The PR team shuffled nervously through slides. Sir, the MirrorNet project is trending in over 40 countries. We've seen a 23% drop in public favorability. Hashtag Justice for Miles is gaining steam. Even our own employees are resharing it. He slammed his fist down. It's a kid. We're getting outflanked by a kid with a refurbished laptop. The CTO cleared his throat. With respect, sir, he's not just a kid anymore, he's a movement. A long silence followed. Then Dunlap leaned back. So we kill the movement. Everyone froze. He used our system, our network, our architecture, he continued. Let's leak a claim that MirrorNet uses stolen Delta Tech infrastructure. That'll spook investors and force platforms to take him down. The legal head glanced up, hesitant. We could get sued for slander if that's disproven. Dunlap smirked. Only if he has the money to fight back. But Dunlap underestimated something bigger than lawyers. The world was watching. Meanwhile, back in Miles's neighborhood, MirrorNet had become more than a project. It had become a safe house of truth. People weren't just using it, they were adding to it. A community of coders, many black, many young, many ignored, began building modules, tools, diagnostics. They called themselves the Unseen. One coder from Baltimore wrote, "This ain't just code, it's protest." A woman from Chicago added, "We've been screaming in silence. MirrorNet is our megaphone." For every troll trying to drag Miles down, 10 more voices rose behind him. It was no longer about his story, it was about all the ones that never got told. At home, Clara sat on their torn leather couch, watching Miles type like the keyboard was a piano and he was composing a revolution. She brought over tea. "Your uncle would have loved this." "I think about him a lot lately," Miles said. "He wanted to build something that helped people." "He did, he raised you." They sat in silence for a moment, the TV flickering with a local news anchor's voice. Teen developer who rose to prominence after exposing gaps in Delta Tech's system is now being hailed as a potential disruptor in the tech equity space. Miles chuckled. "Disruptor? That's corporate speak for won't stay in his lane." Clara sipped her tea. "You never stayed in your lane, baby. You were drawing maps since you were 7. Maps? Maps out of rooms you weren't supposed to be in." Miles smiled. "Guess it's time other people learned how to make their own." That night, Jamie showed up outside his door. She looked tired but determined. Miles opened the door, surprised. "Didn't expect you to come out this far." "I didn't expect to be at the center of a cover-up." She handed him a thumb drive. "Everything from Delta Tech, emails, recordings, the meeting where they tried to erase you." "Why?" "Because I watched too many people like you, like us, get buried to protect people like them." "You'll lose your job." "Then I'll finally be free to do one that matters." Miles took the drive. "You sure?" "No," she replied, "but I know you'll do something with it." By dawn, the documents were uploaded to MirrorNet's whistleblower portal, anonymously. The files revealed a trail of bias, manipulation, and years of quietly discarded internal warnings about inequality in the system. Miles didn't narrate it. He didn't post a long explanation. He let the data speak for itself. And it did. Loudly. That same day, Keisha Barnes, the journalist, published a new headline. He showed them the system was broken. Now he's showing them why it was built that way. The article exploded, and at the end, it posed one haunting question. How many more Miles Johnsons have been erased before they ever got seen? By nightfall, Clara's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Hello? Ms. Johnson, this is Congresswoman Renee Thompson. I read about your son. I'd like to meet him. Privately. I believe we have some work to do. Together." And upstairs, Miles opened his inbox one last time before bed. Among hundreds of new messages was one that made him stop. From info@youngblacktechfounders.org. Subject, "We've been waiting for you." He opened it. It read, "We've been trying to create space for kids like you for a long time. Now the world's listening. Let's talk. The table you were never invited to. It's time we build a new one." Weeks passed. Not quietly, not peacefully, but purposefully. What had started as a spark, Miles standing in a boardroom of billionaires and daring to speak truth, had ignited a blaze that no one could contain. The headlines shifted from curiosity to controversy to change. Schools were asking new questions about how talent was discovered. Companies were reevaluating their intern programs and recruitment pipelines. And tech giants, who had never once looked down past their security desks, were now scrambling to explain how they'd let this kid slip through the cracks. But Miles wasn't interested in their explanations. He was too busy building something better. In a small co-working space on the south side of Atlanta, the first Mirror Lab took shape. The walls were still unpainted. The furniture was second-hand. The internet connection dropped every other hour, but it buzzed with energy. Coders, creatives, teen hackers, community organizers, formerly incarcerated engineers, high school girls who had been told tech was too hard. They all gathered here, working not just on MirrorNet, but on apps for prison reform tracking, AI bias audits, scholarship bots, secure whistleblower tools. "This isn't a startup," Miles told them at their first meeting. "This is a storm shelter for the ones they never expected to stand tall." He didn't sit at the head of the table. He didn't even have a desk. He sat with them, hoodie still pulled over his head, typing, listening, learning. Because this wasn't about being the face, it was about being the foundation. Meanwhile, the pressure on Delta Tech continued to build. With the leaked documents, the internal bias reports, and MirrorNet exposing system flaws in real time, the company was hemorrhaging credibility. An independent audit was launched. Several board members resigned. Whistleblowers were coming forward. And finally, on a Friday morning under bright lights and tired eyes, CEO Richard Dunlap was forced to step down. But Miles didn't celebrate. He barely acknowledged it. Because victory wasn't watching corrupt people fall, it was watching new people rise. That same afternoon, Congresswoman Renee Thompson arrived at Mirror Lab. She didn't come with cameras. No media, no grand speeches. She came in jeans, sneakers, and a plain folder under her arm. "This is a draft," she said, placing the folder on the table. "We're proposing a bill that requires federal tech contractors to publicly audit their AI systems for racial bias. If it passes, it'll be the first law of its kind." Miles flipped through the pages. "What do you need from me?" She smiled. "You've already done it. You showed the world why it matters." But then she hesitated. "What I'd like is for you to testify. Tell Congress what you told that boardroom." Miles looked away for a second, lips pressed tight. "Not sure they want to hear it." "They don't," she replied. "That's why you have to say it." A week later, Miles stood in front of the House Committee on Technology and Ethics. No hoodie this time, just a plain button-down shirt and a steady voice. Behind him sat Clara, Jamie, Keisha, students from the Mirror Lab, teachers, coders, formerly ignored minds from all walks of life. When asked how he fixed Delta Tech's launch failure, Miles didn't talk about code. He talked about perspective, about how tech wasn't broken because of bugs, but because of the people it excluded. "You can't fix a system from the inside if the door's locked from the outside," he said calmly. "So I broke a window, and instead of fixing the glass, they tried to fix me." The room fell silent. Even the most seasoned lawmakers didn't move. "My mom cleaned those offices for 19 years, Miles added. "I sat in hallways where ideas changed the world. But the people who lived in that world were never invited in. That ends now." When he finished, the room erupted, not into applause, but into respectful stillness, the kind of silence reserved for truth that cut too deep to ignore. That night, Clara sat on the apartment balcony, a warm blanket over her legs, staring out at the skyline. Miles joined her, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. "You didn't have to speak like that," she said. "You could have kept building, stayed quiet." "I know. So why'd you do it?" He took a sip before answering. "Because someone else is sitting outside a locked room tonight, and I wanted them to know they're not alone." She smiled, tears forming in her eyes. "You built something bigger than code, baby." "I didn't build it alone." They sat like that for a long time. No screens, no noise, just legacy being passed through the quiet. 1 year later, the first National Black Youth Tech Leadership Summit was hosted in Atlanta. MirrorNet funded the event. It wasn't corporate sponsored. No CEOs on stage, no glitzy product demos. Just 600 young minds, many of them overlooked, underestimated, and extraordinary. The keynote speaker didn't wear a tie. He wore his mother's smile and his uncle's memory. "I'm not here to talk about success," Miles said from the mic. "I'm here to talk about access." He looked out at the sea of bright eyes, raised fists, open notebooks. "They say build your own table." So we did. And we made sure it had extra chairs. One for the kid who fixes his school's Wi-Fi but gets detention for touching it. One for the girl who rewrote a failing app but gets told she talks too much. One for every person who was told, "You don't belong here. We're not waiting for a seat anymore." The crowd rose to its feet, not just in applause, but in purpose. That night back at Mirror Lab, Miles added a new quote to the wall. A small framed photo of Clara in her cleaning uniform, smiling. Under it read, "Some of the smartest minds in the world never got invited to the room, so we built the room."